Hello, friends and neighbors. Do we have any church members here today? Got any church members? Maybe somebody possibly from Mount Tabor or Glasgow Baptist Church. How wonderful. They're two of my favorites. My name is Jacob Locke, and I came to Berrien County about 1800. I finally settled on a little place called Pruitt's Knob. Pruitt's Knob, it's over around Cave City. That's me, Pruitt's Knob. I helped establish some of the earliest churches here in Glasgow and Berrien County, including the Glasgow Baptist Church in 1818 and Mount Tabor, formerly called Beaver Creek Church, by the way, the oldest church in the county, and that was in 1802. And I remained its pastor for 38 years. I was born in Hanover County, Virginia, in the year of 1768. So I'm old enough to remember the War of Rebellion against the tyranny of the mother country. That war took a great toll upon the citizenry of our country, the very heart of our country. We were forced to pay terrible taxes, as you all know. From a religious standpoint, did you know we were forced to pay taxes that paid the salaries of the Episcopalian clergy? So if we were Baptist like myself, or Methodist or Presbyterian, we had to pay their salaries. And we could hardly afford then to support the conscience of our own faith. In other words, pay our own preachers. And above the taxes of just living and providing for your family, it was a terrible time. And after the war, the people fell into a lot of sin. The menfolk especially. Gambling, much fighting and carousing, much boozing, all kinds of sin. They were unchurched and biblically unlearned, and there was a great need for revival. I had felt the call to preach, and I told my wife, and I felt like I needed to come to this region of the country to plant the cross on a firm foundation here. That's what the Lord led me to do. So we planned it. We had one son at the time, and we headed out, following the trail of Daniel Boone and early explorers. My wife was Margaret Jett, and she told me she was the niece of Davy Crockett. So we penetrated deep into the Virginia and Kentucky forest, meeting with bear, meeting with wolf, and many an Indian. One of my dear friends was killed by a ferocious Indian. So we crossed many a turbulent stream, climbed many a rugged mountain and hill, before finally reaching safely Fort Boonesborough. We traveled on to Fort Herod before coming here and settling about 1800. Now when I came to 1800, to these churches here, I found that it was kind of like I expected. Not very many people went to church. I would guess, maybe 1 in 12 attended church at all. But after a lot of hard work and preaching the gospel, I'm proud to say that I saw the membership of the church increase faster than the membership of the population of the county. So we were very pleased. I also let me just say we formed an association of churches called the Green River Association of United Baptists. And we had wonderful revivals, the greatest of which being in 1829, when 1,357 people were saved and baptized that year. Let me say that again. You might think you heard me wrong. 1,357. Isn't that incredible? Well, we were jubilant. But then something happened. The following year, something began to happen, and it got worse. And then, it originated in 1827 over in Virginia. And it spread till it finally got here. It was a doctrine of a man named Alexander Campbell. And it rivaled our churches. In 1831, Alexander Campbell came here to Glasgow and spoke and preached. and Glasgow Baptist Church lost half its membership. So we were frantic. But we worked all the harder and preached all the harder, and through the years, of course, we had great success. And of course, the Baptist was the largest denomination, of course, in Kentucky. So everything was going well till finally we had a split. And this happened because of missionaries. See, many of our churches felt like we should be given to missions. But some of them didn't want to give anything. No doubt a holdover from the early colonial days when they had to pay the taxes for the Episcopalian priest. They never got over that very well. So they didn't want to give anything. But finally they censored, the association censored those who wanted to be missions, and so our churches withdrew, including Mount Tabor and Glasgow Baptist Church, forming a new association called the Liberty Association. We dealt with a lot of things. I was moderator for many years, and I got to deal with a lot of issues like Freemasons, like foot washing, dress conduct among the members, and code of conduct. One that you probably would never dream of that came up here in Barron County because of the year and because of the location. You'd have never thought witchcraft. Yes, we had people being accused, some elderly ladies being accused of witchcraft. When I finally got a chance to address it, because it was getting most serious, there was even talk of putting them to death, like the old witchcraft trials we used to hear about. I told them when I addressed them, I said, now these old women that you're accusing of being witches, there's no doubt that in their day, they probably possessed the power to bewitch and charm certain people, especially some men folk. But believe me, those days are long past and gone. And thank goodness I got what I'm getting from you, a few chuckles and a few nods of the head of agreement, and the old women were left alone. Praise the Lord for that. Well, I've rambled on, and I know it's about time for me to let you go on to your next place. I've enjoyed meeting with you. Let me just say I came to Kentucky when many of the cities and the towns that you see today were nothing but forest. I saw them before they were created. I lived to see the steamboat travel up and down the rivers where once I paddled in my little single canoe by myself. But above all, I was glad to know that I could preach to a great number of people in this territory, and many people were saved. Many people were baptized into that glorious Church of Jesus Christ. It was with great difficulty in 1844, in October of 1844, I preached my last sermon because of illness. It was very difficult for me at Mount Tabor Baptist Church. That was my last sermon. And that following January, I called my family around me and told them, I'm going to be with Jesus. Meet me there. Meet me there. That was my wife, my one daughter, and my 8 sons. And I lived to see them all profess Christianity, and I'm so thankful for that. I was buried, my wife soon followed after my death, on Pruitt's Knob near the residence. And later, some well-meaning people, I guess our graves were not taken care of, it being out to themselves. They brought us to the Glasgow Cemetery here. And that large concrete, I'm trying to think of the word for it. We'll call it a crypt. I can't think of a better word. That's mine. I don't like to brag, but it's probably the biggest one in the section, so they must have thought a lot of me, and I appreciate it very much. So my final words to you is thank you for listening tonight. Nice to meet you all, and I hope you're all making preparations like my family. When you leave this world, meet me there. Meet me there. God bless you all, and I hope you have a good night. Hope you all have a good night. God bless you.
Thank you. Folks, welcome. Welcome on this election day, August the 6th, 1855. Elections in my time period were quite interesting. Most times they were at least a 3-day affair, kind of like the carnivals and fairs that you see. Many folks would gather around It was kind of a very festive environment. Folks would be able to not only converse with one another, but also be able to vote for their favorite candidate. And as a candidate for lieutenant governor in 1855 for the American Know Nothing Party, my name is James Hardy, and it's good to meet each and every one of you. And I ask for your vote for lieutenant governor. You know, politics, not only in Kentucky, but all across the United States, is quite interesting. Myself, I'm a representative beginning as a school teacher. When my dad came from Virginia 55 years ago, he set up a school in the Rock Springs, Blue Springs area next to the Rock Springs Baptist Church. My dad was a surveyor. He was also a farmer and also a much intellectual, learned man. His main interest, though, was in farming. But farming would not make enough money to be able to provide for his family and my kids, so instead of that, we decided that we better try to do something else, so we went into school teaching. Well, school teaching didn't make a lot of money as well, so what we decided to do is, those in my area, in the community that I was part of, decided that they would set up a school and they would hire me where I could also, at the same time, farm. And we set up one of the first private schools in Kentucky. The school that was set up by my dad, he was able to teach and farm at the exact same time. But as time went on and my dad passed, I did take over the responsibilities of teaching at the school. But in the early around 1815, 1820, I took an interest in politics. And because of that, I ran for state legislature in the 1820s, 1830s, and 1840s. And I was known as a great debater. I was a member of the Whig Party, but as the Whig Party started to fade out and go into the Republican Party, then I changed my allegiance to what is known as the Know Nothing Party. And people would ask us questions in reference to what we knew, and we said, we don't know anything. But the Know Nothing Party was in the interest of the working class. They believed in regulation of industry. We also believe in women's rights. We were anti-slavery. And we believe, of course, in, as I said, the working man's rights and helping the working man in any way that we could. In my process of running for lieutenant governor, my governor, Charles Moorhead, my friend Charles Moorhead became the governor. I was elected in 1855. And unfortunately, I only presided over the Senate 1 year, and that was 1856 because I passed. My legacy and my grave is in the area of the Rock Springs community in northern Barron County. I was a long life dedicated resident of Glasgow, and my roots and my heart is towards Glasgow. But it was an honor and pleasure to serve as your lieutenant governor from this area. And after my death, I was buried next to my daughter's home in the northern section of Barron County near Hardyville that we know is at Hart County today. And there is where my remains are. And I appreciate you all listening tonight. Thank you once again.
Thank you.
Well, welcome to Fort Williams. My name is David Richardson, and I'm going to take you back to the heart of the Civil War in 1863, a war that tore this country apart, when neighbor fought against neighbor and friend against friend, and there was no state that was more torn apart than this Commonwealth, where brother fought against brother. Well, let me tell you a little bit about this area. Now, Glasgow, about that time, had 500-600 people residing here. The square was mostly houses that surrounded it, but there was a business district between Main and Green Street and old Broadway in front in that area. The Presbyterian Church, well, it was mostly a hospital, and the courthouse was used to store grain. But we had another hospital here in town. You may know the Delvaux House up there on North Ray Street. It's still there. Well, they used it as a hospital, and if one of the Union or Confederate troops died, well, they just buried him in Old Man Delvo's garden back there. Let me tell you a little bit more about myself. See, I go way back. I fought in the Revolutionary War for the Stars and Stripes, and I was at the taking of Stony Point in New York. And I also fought in the War of 1812. Now, by the time that Civil War come around, I was 104 years old, so most of my fighting days were behind me. You know, but I did support the Union at that time. Now, Barron County, I'd say it was probably 2-1 in favor of the Confederacy, although we had Union troops come up from Austin and 88 and Lick Branch. I'd say the surrounding counties, well, they tended to favor more of the Union. Well, let me tell you a little bit more about Fort Williams. If you've not been here before, you can look up there in that big old mountain up there. That's where our fort was built. But to give you a little bit of the history of where that came from, this area fell within the jurisdiction of the 23rd U.S. Army Corps for the Union. And the Glasgow was the headquarters of the 3rd Division. And they decided, the Union, that we needed a fortification here in Glasgow. So they sent some men down from the Department of Ohio to build us a fort. Now, it was the soldiers' job around here they had a lot of jobs. They had to protect the communications between the northern armies. They had to protect a train station as over there in Cave City, make sure it was safe. And they had to try to put down rebel excursions, especially by that General John Hunt Morgan. Hey, a pesky one he was, you know. And I tell you, so that fort got built. It's about March of 1863. And so some Union soldiers, they would typically come down that railroad and they'd march to 12 miles over here at Glasgow and they'd be stationed here. In March of 1863, there was the command was Major Samuel Martin. Now his office was more in town. It wasn't there in the fort. They had the Union soldiers there, and in October, about 6 months later, the Samuel Martin, he had his men up there, and they was mostly asleep. It was the 37th Kentucky Mounted Infantry, and it just happened on one October night. A Confederate army come up from Nashville, led by Colonel John Hughes, and they attacked them, and the Union wasn't ready. And the Confederates won, and they killed a Union soldier, took 142 prisoners of war, stole 200 guns, or 200 horses, 400 guns, stole $9,000 from one of our banks, and $400 worth of goods from one of our stores. Now, Major Martin accused the Confederates of shooting on unarmed Union soldiers and said that was ungentlemanly. Well, the Confederates burned that fort before they left, and over the years, it never did get rebuilt. It's been known by 3 different names. It was originally Fort Bull, then they changed it to Fort Hobson, and now it's known as Fort Williams. But I tell you, that was known as the Battle of Glasgow, what I just told you. But that was not the first Civil War battle fought in Barron County. No. That distinction goes over there to Center. Yep. So there was some Union soldiers over there, and they were trying to round up some of them Southern sympathizers. But we had a colonel from the Confederate that was right from here in Barron County, Joseph Lewis. And he was famous for leading the Orphan Brigade. Well, he heard about it, and he went over there and attacked some of them soldiers over in Center, and that was our first Civil War battle. There were some other battles here in Barron County. 4 different excursions were brought in. You remember me telling you about that General John Hunt Morgan? He led 4 different fights here in Barron County. One of them was down there at the Barron River. Now, the Union soldiers were trying to put up some cables, telegraph cables down there, and he heard about it, and he attacked them, kept them from doing it. But I tell you, something that's kind of curious about old John Hunt Morgan. Before he left, he had a newspaper guy. I think y'all call him publicists these days. But he had him write a paper, something in the paper, thanking the women of Barron County. He said he had never received he and his men, the hospitality like they did when they was here, their food and medical needs, and just said they were the greatest women of all right here in Barron County. So I thought that was kind of pretty smart on his part, I guess, you know. And well, you know what, something I forgot to tell you, I was telling you about Colonel Joseph Lewis. Man's buried right there. You see that big old obelisk? Biggest obelisk in the whole cemetery. That's Joseph Lewis. He got up to the ranks of Brigadier General before the Civil War was over, and they buried him right there. Let's see, what else about the Civil War? Oh, yeah. So, here's a funny story. You know, I was telling you about the railroad over there in Cave City? So, there's the Union would bring soldiers in down there, and they pretty much stop in Cave City, and some of them would get off, come to Glasgow, some of them would go on down south. But they always stopped there, get something to eat, take care of their needs, whatever. Well, there was a man, a young boy named Thomas Chapman over there. Well, he saw the pattern, and he kind of sided with the Confederacy. So after the train was clear one time, he jumped on that train and started it up and jumped off, and it took out of Glasgow Junction like a bullet. I guess he's hoping it would hit like a head-on with something, but it didn't. It just run out of steam. But I tell you, the Union, they weren't too happy, and old Thomas and his friends had to stay in hiding quite some time. Oh, what a dickus he was. Now, I tell you what, there's another general, Confederate general named Bragg. Oh, he was a mean old cuss. Let me tell you. One time he was coming into Barron County, and his wagon broke down there by the Huggins house, there near in the square. And his men were out, you know, just kind of meandering as they was trying to fix that wagon. And, well, it just so happens, the Huggins family, they had an orchard in the southern part of the county where they grew apples and peaches, and made their own brandy. And they stored it in the cellar there at their house. Well, them men found that cellar. And they found that brandy, and they started selling it and making a little money on the side till they got caught. So I guess they made a little pretty penny. Here's a kind of a sadder story about old General Bragg. I guess one of them men must have got in that brandy, because they went over there up to Cleveland Avenue and the Smith house there. One of the men broke in there and scared the women in that house something awful. Next day, Mr. Smith complained to General Bragg, and so General went to figure out who it was and found out and sentenced him to death. And even Mr. Smith thought that was a little heavy-handed and kind of made a plea for the boy, but General Bragg wouldn't hear nothing of it. Made that young man ride in a wagon with his coffin to the execution site, and they shot him and buried him right there on the spot. It was rough. But I tell you, even after the Civil War was over, that bitterness did not just go away. No, 2 years afterwards, about 1867, there's a man lived around here named Columbus Petticord. He was a captain in the Confederate Army, and he was going to a political rally over there in Park City. And as he's getting close, a couple of men jumped in and said, "Did you used to fight for the Confederates, be a captain for them?" And he said, "I ain't no captain no more." And they shot and killed him right there. And they jumped out and they just melted in the crowd, and they never did find out who did it. So I tell you, the Civil War was a rough time. Now, I'll tell you something. There's a lot of men, brave men, who fought gallantly for both sides in that Civil War from this area. But between you and me, I hope we never have a war like that in this country. I hope we can be just a little bit more agreeable with our disagreeables and just find a way to get along. Now, you all have a good night, and thank you very much.
Do you guys hear the whistle? It's the LN train. It's arrived in Glasgow Junction. I can just hear the ringing of carriages as they enter the depot. You should see the line at the delivery. Well, the post office is what I meant. But you should see the line there. Country folk, lawyers, merchants, they'd come there and await the sorting and delivery of their mail. I'm Arthur Kroc. I turned 13 this year. My favorite thing to do is to joust on wooden horses with my friends. We'd head to the depot to see if we can hear any outside news of the outside world. Yeah, so let me tell you more about my grandparents, a little bit about my grandparents and stuff. My grandfather was Emanuel Morris. He owned the Morris block on their lintels and stuff, and he also was the leading merchant in Glasgow. He had the most modern store in the area. Now, even though my grandfather was the head of the family, my grandmother was the head of the household, see? And even though she, was disciplining, cooking, cleaning, all that stuff, she was also the unquestionable head of the family. Well, no, unquestionable assistant to the doctor. When there was an emergency, she'd get the doctor, and yeah, they get to work, especially if you were having a baby. So that happened. But anyways, I also had a mammy. Her name was Aunt Courtney, is what I always called her. Now, sometimes I'd go over to her house and she'd cook me something real nice. Her and Uncle Armistead were both born slaves, unfortunately, but they knew how they came here. Their ancestors belonged to the Amazulu tribe in Africa under their king, King Shaka Zulu. Unfortunately, their ancestors were captured in battle, and they were sold by Arab slave traders. They were shipped here to the colonies in that shameful era. Whenever I ate there, she'd prepare me with a nice white tablecloth on the table. She'd feed me all sorts of stuff. Chocolate cream pie, bacon, black-eyed peas, you name it. Although she had children, but they were not allowed to dine with me. They were not permitted, although I would have gladly eaten their company. In fact, none of the mothers there allowed me to eat with their children. I could find that same kind of hospitality near the Wells place. My grandfather actually gave the Wells, who were also born slaves, their land and stuff. So it was really generous for my grandfather. The highest hospitality at the time was when Courtney made all that food and white tablecloth. That was actually the highest civility at the time, although I stopped seeing her after high school. A popular sport here in Barron was fox hunting, actually. One of the popular sports was fox hunting. We would get on horses around moonrise. They'd load a wagon full of bourbon whiskey, and we'd go hunt those foxes. Although I liked fox hunting, my favorite hunting activity was actually hunting of the quails. I like to call them bob whites. I'd go to Highsville to an old friend of mine. We'd go ahead and shoot them. Well, let me tell you a little bit about transportation. We had a train, but we also, to travel to other cities and towns nearby, we get in this red wagon pulled by 4 horses, and they would travel 16 miles to another place. Can you imagine riding in a wagon? That way, cars in my day were there, but only rich people could afford them. So they had to pay the wagoneer to travel 16 miles to places like Summershade and stuff. Anyhow, our service, like firefighters, for instance, were mainly volunteers. My Uncle Lewis was the lead firefighter there. The fire engine was hand-drawn. It was a little cart they'd hand-drawn, and when a fire broke out, I would try to join them. My uncle would get on a horse he named Lady Belle, and I'd try and follow after them. They'd put out the fire with the rubber hose, all that. Now, the hounds we got for fox hunting and hunting bob whites were provided by a guy named Dan Smiley. He breeded hounds, foxhounds especially too, hunt those. And I was really good friends with him. We'd go on fox hunts with him too. Now, Barron County was a dry county, and Glasgow was a dry city. And when I say dry and wet, I mean alcoholic and non-alcoholic. Dry being non-alcoholic. And despite us being a non-alcoholic or dry city, they still were moonshiners that would sell illegal whiskey known as White Lightning. And the Marshal Winston Collins was in charge of putting down those operations and controlling alcohol violence. Saturday nights were the worst. They're most violent. Moving on. The Marshal was also in charge of getting rid of the whiskey and stuff. Anyways, I view Glasgow as a utopia, but unfortunately, though, I also saw the corruption in human nature and stuff, and I know that even though Barron County wasn't perfect, it still felt like home to me. and I really enjoy living and growing up here. Thank you.
Welcome, travelers. Come on in and join me here at the Royal Cafe and Motel. Come on in. I'm here visiting with my friend. She works here at the cafe. Have you heard of the Green Book? Yes, the Green Book. In the 1930s, a postal worker in New York got the idea to make a list of all the safe places for us African Americans as we travel through the United States. And if we needed a place to eat or a place to stay, we could go to these places without fear of being turned around or harassed. You know, most of the businesses we weren't welcome in that was owned by the whites. Well, our children couldn't even go to school with the white children. It was called separate but equal. It was seldom equal. But this fine establishment right here, the Royal Cafe and Motel, is listed in an edition of the Green Book. And during that time, I took my daughter to the Trig Theater. It was located on the square here in Glasgow. Now, we were allowed to go in, but we had to sit in the first rows in front of the screen. Is that where you like to sit when you go to the movies? Later, the Trig Theater closed, and we were allowed to go to the Plaza Theater. We had our own section there. It was in the balcony. It was like everywhere we went. And I remember the businesses around the square. There was a Holmes restaurant, and we weren't allowed to go in. But there was a black man that cooked in the kitchen, Mr. Willie D. He made the best hamburgers. And we were allowed to go around to the back, place our order, and get our food. Well, one Saturday, my daughter Eleanor and her family come to town, and my little granddaughter Sherry took off running because she's going to get a hamburger, and she ran straight to the front door. My daughter had to run so fast to catch her, and she said, "Honey, we can't go in that door." And she said, "Mama, there's people in there." She was so young, she just didn't understand. But thankfully, all that began to change with the Supreme Court ruling, Brown versus Topeka Board of Education, declared school segregation unconstitutional in 1954. It took a while for things to change, though. I remember my daughter and her husband, they lived at Temple Hill. And when their oldest child was old enough to go to school, they come in here to Glasgow to the Board of Education to see how they could get transportation. So the Board of Education asked them, "Do you have any more children school age?" And they told them, "Well, our little daughter will be old enough to go next year." So the Board of Education told them, "Well, just wait till next year and we'll pick them both up." And that's what they did. The next year, when little Sherry was old enough to go to school, her and her brother Gary was bused into Glasgow. What happened was the bus driver would come early every morning and pick them up, bring them into Glasgow. Then every afternoon, after he ran his route at Temple Hill, he'd come back and get them. Well, I was just so frightened and worried about those children. You know, they was little, and it was rainy some days, and it was cold. But thankfully, Miss Lou Smith, she lived in the big white house on the corner of Scott Street. Some of y'all might remember it. She had a boarding house. So she told me those children could stay at her house. The bus could drop them off every morning, and he could pick them up every afternoon. That took a load off my mind. Governor Burt Combs, he helped change things here in Kentucky by making a ruling that he made the ruling that segregation was illegal for all the businesses and persons that held a state license. But I lived in a dark period during that time. It was called the Jim Crow era. Now the black-owned businesses and the white-owned businesses, they thrived because we all needed the same services. Besides this black-owned cafe here, we had other diners and restaurants here in Glasgow. We had the Curd Moppins Taxi Company. We had barbers. We had dry cleaners. Mr. Alonzo Webb and his son was carpenters. We had a doctor and a dentist. And Miss Ruby Alexander, she had a beauty shop. And there were several of those also. Well, we also had Tinsley Funeral Home and the Watts Funeral Home. We had our own school too, Ralph Bunch. Oh, I remember the businesses downtown too, around the square. George J. Ellis Drugs, J.J. Newberry, Ben Franklin Five and Dime, Bernard's, and Jolly's. But you see, that was not part of my community as much as what I just described to you. Oh my goodness. It occurs to me I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Addie Curd. Now don't y'all stand there. Just come on in here and get some of this fresh baked peach cobbler with a big old scoop of vanilla ice cream, piping hot cup of coffee. And if you need a place to stay, you can stay and eat right here in comfort, convenience, and cleanliness.
Good evening. Y'all have caught me at a tough time. We just lost my husband, James Norris Gray. He was only 55, really untimely and premature death. And not just his family's mourning, but our community, Glasgow, is mourning, communities across the state. Our employees have lost a leader that they loved and trusted. Industries lost a mentor, a visionary really. And our kids, Julia, Lisa, Howard, Stephen, Jimmy, and Franklin have lost their father, and I've lost my best friend, my business partner, my husband. And he believed so much in our family, and our community, and our country, as do I. And I'm sorry, I'm Lois Howard Gray. James and I started our life together back in '47, and now it's 1972. I can hardly believe that, but back then, America was still reeling from the Great Depression and World War II, and James served his country in the Navy. His leadership abilities really served well on the ships, and I actually served in the Navy as well in the Waves unit, which was just for women, newly designed unit. And I drafted and mapped ships in the Atlantic. So I've had a lot of responsibility for a long time, and you may have heard of my father. He was a prominent physician in the area, Dr. C.C. Howard. He was known for building tuberculosis hospitals in Kentucky. And James's family was from out in Marrowbone. They owned the Gray and Norris General Store out there, and eventually they moved into town and bought the Glasgow ice plant. And they got worried, James really, he always had such a keen business sense that, you know, progress with refrigeration and air conditioning was gonna omit the need for ice plants. So he wanted to go in some sort of industry that would always have a demand. So 1957, he and Ernest Simpson, a craftsman that built houses locally, started Glasgow Construction Company. And the first project they had was a tobacco barn on my dad's farm. But they did a lot more. They built Caverna High School over in Horse Cave, and they built the Visitor Center out at Mammoth Cave National Park. They eventually dissolved the company, but while James was doing that, I turned my passion for interior design into a business with my cousin, Joe Crenshaw. We were supposed to just do drapes, but we did full-fledged interior design, and we eventually sold the business. And because my husband was so amazing at building relationships, recruiting talent, assessing customer needs, and delivering on those, we went back into construction. And in October of 1960, we started James Norris Gray Construction Company. Our first project, major project, was the Uptowner Motel in downtown Glasgow. And eventually we realized if we were going to keep going, we needed more customers. and our region needed more jobs. So James started working very closely with the Glasgow Chamber of Commerce and State Economic Development, and was pretty much credited with bringing two of the big industries here, our Donnelly & Sons and Eaton Corporation. So as we kept building, we eventually needed new offices. We just built last year on Happy Valley Road. I did all the interior design, of course, all modern and vibrant. And Howard, our oldest, he had just graduated from Western. He came to work for us full time. And now we're at a pivotal moment in our story. My heart is empty and big decisions to make about the company. Howard's only 23 and Jimmy is only 18. He's studying at Vanderbilt, following in my footsteps. And I'm not sure how two young men are going to do in such a competitive and complex industry. But I do have faith in our family. I think we're forging on. I don't think we will sell the company. And they're going to follow in our husband's footsteps. Howard's going to take over as president, and I will become chairwoman of the board. So I will be the backbone of the company. And actually, a newspaper editor here once said about James that he was a builder of people. He believed very deeply in the golden rule, and we believe in that as well. So we will forge on the gray way and continue. We don't have a lot of time to mourn. We have a commitment to complete the Eaton Axle project, but I know that we will. And of course, I can't predict the future, but I do feel that we'll be one of the most successful companies Glasgow's ever seen, and maybe become one of the top design build firms in the nation. Thank you. Have a great night.